Good evening. Well, it's a cool 88 degrees. It was 93 earlier, and then it'll be 67 later tonight. And this comes to you by way of the Thomas Jefferson report. The other evening, I went for a run in the dark, but it wasn't really dark because the moon was out. Ages ago, I wanted a friend of mine to relive the story of the Headless Horseman. You probably know the story of Sleepy Hollow. And Ichabod Crane was bothered by the Headless Horseman. And what makes it particularly a creepy story is what the story's about. It only makes sense if the Headless Horseman is chasing you because he wants another head. Anyhow, there was a hollow, and at night the moonlight, just as it was here, is enough to see your shadow on the ground. But riding a horse on a moonlit evening, which may sound dangerous, but it's not. Especially if you have a full moon. And you can see your shadow and the horse's shadow on the ground. Now, I don't bounce as high as I used to, so I probably wouldn't do that now. But I wanted to convince a friend of mine for us to tape a session through an area where it was surrounded in a circle of trees. So we can dream and have fun even in the chaos that surrounds us. Do we want to constrain the imagination of children? Do we really know what they're getting out of social media? And shouldn't we figure out what we're subtracting from social media, or what someone wants to subtract? Are they going to subtract from media the friendly associations transgender kids have, or the way a person can be anonymous and have a social existence? Are we going to tell the children what they can say or not, how they can dress or not? And I'm not saying that everything's out of bounds. Obviously, when you raise a child, you do it best by example and by direction. And would you rather make the choice yourself, what your son's or daughter's choices are in the negotiated arrangement that is a family, or leave it to the Surgeon General? And they keep making comparisons even today. Obviously, this is a campaign. They keep comparing it to what drugs one may take. They compare it to cars that are dangerous. You won't hear them talk about guns, though. And you won't hear them talk about the deaths from guns that probably affect kids today more than anything else. The failure of our society, from our leaders and, if you will, our governors, they're creating these rules and laws, is that they look to seize for easy solutions. And it's the unintended consequence of a general rule that may compromise a young man or woman for their entire life. And we should be aware of that. Working on the Hill, in particular, I'd see how how Congress, but I'd advise people on different legislation. I'd see how they would pass a bill but not consider that it had a bad effect on other people. And some want a bad effect too. And some want to just be able to posture that what they're doing is good and makes sense so they can win an election. And some I've literally heard say, I'll let the courts figure it out. But why, whether you're a governor of Louisiana or any other place, why should you ask the court to figure something out when they have before? Why? The first commandment, and there are 3 versions in the Bible, It says, I am the Lord thy God, and thou shalt have no false gods before thee. Okay, now you can quibble with my paraphrasing or which of the versions and so forth, but you can't ignore the context. In Exodus, this is about Moses, right? Who is he talking about? Who are the 10 Commandments addressing? They're addressing those Jews who were slaves who've been released, the Exodus, the march to the Promised Land, a place where Moses will never get. And so, when they're talking about the 10 Commandments, I am the Lord thy God, that's Yahweh, whose name should not be uttered, he who is and causes to be. It's not God the Father of Jesus. So, and I don't quarrel with the right of Jews to identify it as I have just done. This is our law. This is the Old Testament. This is what it says. So, there's that. I think let me talk about something else. How about Judge Luce Cannon? Now, she's having a hearing tomorrow, Friday, it'll be, in Fort Pierce, Florida. I had a case in that courthouse, a criminal case, but it wasn't a federal case, it was a state case. And it's just, you have the NASA nearby and you have the beautiful shore and stuff like that. But what's she going to be fighting about? She's going to be fighting about whether Jack Smith is without authority because of the way he was appointed and the way funds are dedicated. Now, if that doesn't sound like picking a side and trying to find a way to end a case for political reasons instead of for good and right sounding precedent that should dictate a result. And, you know, there was an effort using the same arguments to get rid of Mueller, that special counsel. Didn't succeed. So it's not like there hasn't been people who've gone before us who've already considered this issue. And then another thing, you often hear about people submitting amici briefs, friends of the court. And that does happen. Some judges say I won't accept it. Usually you hear about it in appellate cases, not in a trial court case, not in a criminal case. But not only is the court apparently entertaining amicus briefs on this bullshit argument, but is going to allow a half hour to each of 3 persons who want to come there and argue this to the court. How about that? Now let's go over a couple of other things. If you talk to a lawyer who's a litigator, who goes into court and tries cases, he or she will tell you, you get assigned a case, and you appear in court, and the judge is in charge of the case, but in federal and state court, often, there is a magistrate, and the magistrate is empowered, particularly in the federal court, to review the facts and the law and make a recommendation to the judge. And the judges designate the magistrates to do that. And so you get another, if you will, level of opinion that's been digested and considered by another judge, in this case, with more experience than Luce Cannon. And then the judge can modify it or accept it entirely. And often they accept it because these magistrates are reliable and they understand what's right, and an argument like this one would be a simple one. But Judge Cannon hasn't used such a person. And we find out from the New York Times today that 2 judges in that Florida courthouse, or in that region, offered advice. Judge Luce Cannon didn't want it. And the judge or judges encouraged her to think about not handling the case because it was complicated and she had very little trial experience. And don't kid yourself, a simple trial, say what we would call a one-by drug case, hand-to-hand one-by drug case. Agent's there, person pays the agent money, or vice versa. In other words, there's a transaction in which money is traded for drugs. And it's usually recorded, and it's a slam dunk case. So, there's no question, however, that this case is more complicated because there are special rules that apply to top secret documents. There are special rules that apply to documents, period. The number of documents and the additional question of whether or not Trump obstructed the investigation makes it more difficult. So you get my point, which you already have, even without this legal seance I've imposed upon you. What we have is a judge that is not impartial, and depending on what she does in the next couple of days, Friday and Monday, we may have a new argument to pitch her off the case and get a trial going, if not before the election, after the election, because right now it's not going that way. Now, on the political side of things, how is our boy Biden doing? Well, I don't know. It appears he's doing better. I mean, subjectively, when I see what he's been doing on a day-to-day basis, like I said the other day, I felt a movement in the right direction. Something good is going on. Well, what could be better than a poll by Fox News that between March and yesterday or the day before, they took a poll and Biden has gone up 6 points. He is now, and statistically insignificant, 2 points ahead of Trump. And reports from the inner sanctum, the Hitlerian place where Trump makes his way in Florida, that Trump was beside himself, that Fox News, whom he thinks of as his propaganda organ, is basically reporting, we got polling that says you're going down. Now, is this going to continue? I think so. It'll be interesting to see what effect we have when we do the debate, so-called, next Thursday. Now, I'm out, and I told you it's pretty warm out, but it feels better than it has the other days. So I probably have miscalculated what the wind is. But when you go from 93 to 88 to 67 later this evening, you have a range to deal with. And we all know that we should listen because we can bake ourselves, literally bake ourselves. And the first sign that we're making a mistake by being out in the heat is to have confusion. So if you find yourself in that situation, immediately get yourself some water and get yourself into an air conditioned or at least a cooler place, so that and allow yourself to be bored for a while, to just sit there and let it happen. Now, I do take my own advice, but here's the problem. Each of us has a little bit of this pride that we were these great athletes years and years ago, and so we think we still are. And that's something you have to guard against. Humility is the best way over years of life to adapt to what's going on around you, including heat. And there's quite a bit of that. So now we're talking about heat for the individual, and the way right now the weather has divided itself in almost catastrophic ways is in the east we have heat, and in the west we have flood and fire. In northern Maine, it is hotter there than it is in Virginia. This kind of defies our common sense about as you go further north, things get cooler, but that's not happening. So these anomalies correspond to global warming. And yeah, let your neighbor, oh no, it's been hot before. Yeah, well, not like this. And not while we've had a population like we've had. And ever since the Industrial Revolution, humans have been making the negative difference that is putting us all at risk. And so that's one of our problems. Now let me return, because this really annoys me, this 10 Commandments in every classroom. I think, number one, the content of the 10 Commandments that say, I'm the Lord thy God. You're not going to have images before you. You're going to celebrate the Sabbath. There are these commandments that are plainly religious. And the governor today again said, oh, well, we just want them to know where the law came from. Now, the 10 Commandments were created with the finger of God in 2 stone tablets. And I don't know what Moses was doing the 3 days. He was busy doing that. Can I help you? No, I got this. I want this done a certain way. So that's what you're supposed to believe if you were at that mountain wondering where Moses was. And so the definition of these 10 Commandments is found in 3 places, in Exodus, I believe. And one of the problems with who's the first lawgiver is what these laws were. They're very simple. There's the religious, and what you might say is not religious, and says you shouldn't kill. But who are they talking about? Are they talking about David? Should not be killing the enemies of the Jews? That the extreme measures to convince Egypt to release the Jews as slaves for their exodus, there wasn't violence involved in that? Firstborn were safe if there was blood on their door where they lived. Somebody has to look at the whole thing. I don't know that the lawyers, when they get this, will do that, but damn, they really should. Because it makes ridiculous the notion that this is being offered because Moses was the first lawgiver, and he wasn't. You know, you've heard of the Code of Hammurabi, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Well, you know, that came up in 2400 BC. So 2,400 years before Jesus, we had the Code of Hammurabi. Now, from time to time, you probably also heard that's draconian. And that's because Draco, or Draco, I wasn't there, I don't know how he said his name, he created a code as well. And his objective was to replace oral and whatever might be written into a coherent single code. So he was a lawgiver. And there were, around the world, different variations of law and code. And the 10 Commandments didn't give much guidance in terms of your code. Don't kill with guns or any other way. How's that? How does that work? Honor me. I'm your God. Don't lie. Don't covet your friend or neighbor's wife. So, when you strip the proposal of an ambitious politician to posture himself ahead of the most conservative, stupid, irrational, unfair, oppressive people on the planet who just want to force you to follow their religion, you have to call them out. And if our courts fail to do that, we can't take that, because all of this is a process. There's a miserable movie which is gorgeously done, that really talks about how people lose their freedom. Both the oppressed and the oppressors. Of course, it's about Germany. And it has Viggo Mortensen as the lead actor. He plays, for lack of a simpler description, the Aryan Christian. And he has a best friend. And it's a testament to the acting ability of the participants in a movie called Good, G-O-O-D. And some say good comes from God and vice versa. You want to see how it can happen that people go from being joyous and peaceful and seemingly lovable to the creatures who would kill others. They lose their heads. They are the headless horsemen of our time. And they seek to rip our head off and to destroy it and replace their head if and as they can find somebody as craven as they are. Is that really where we are? No, we're not there yet. But it's where we can be when you consider how brilliant, how cultured the Germans were, and they couldn't stop it. And if we don't wake up and fight, as I believe Trump is realizing Biden can do and appears prepared to do, then we can lose our freedom, lose our democracy. And that's our challenge. So here I am walking amidst the heat in my cathedral of trees. And if I can, I'll be out again tomorrow. All the best. Bye-bye.